I remember my 6th birthday, or rather, I try to forget it. It was supposed to be a day of laughter and cake, but it ended with a chilling silence and a deep-seated fear. We celebrated at my grandmother's house, an old building with large windows and a lush backyard garden. My parents had invited all my kindergarten friends, and I felt like a little king that day. After a series of games and delicious food, the climax arrived, opening presents. I was so excited, tearing through wrapping paper after wrapping paper while my friends cheered joyfully. My parents were busy taking pictures of every moment, and my grandmother sat in the corner armchair, smiling warmly, observing all the fun. However, amidst the commotion, I felt a gaze. Not the friendly gaze of my aunt or cousin, but something heavy and cold, as if observing me from behind the crowd. I lifted my gaze from a new toy and scanned the room. Nothing suspicious, just familiar smiling faces. But the feeling didn't dissipate. I felt like someone was hiding. As it was a game of hide and seek, I decided to find a really good spot to not be found. I stepped out into the backyard, heading towards the large bushes near the fence. The sound of my friends' laughter faded behind me. I walked further into the bushes, enjoying the brief solitude and letting my imagination run wild. Suddenly, I heard a sound, a whisper. Not a clear sound, more like a faint hiss rustling through the leaves. I held my breath, my heart pounding. It wasn't my sound of my friends. Too low, too hoarse, and somehow it felt incredibly close. I dared to peek through a gap in the dense foliage, and I saw him. Behind the biggest old oak tree stood a boy. He was my age, maybe a little older, with messy black hair and eyes that seemed too dark for his years. He wore worn, ragged clothes, and his face was smudged with dirt. He just stood there, staring at me. No smile, no words, just staring. A pure, unadulterated fear enveloped me, overpowering my childish curiosity. I don't know why, but there was something about him that sent shivers down my spine. He didn't look like my friends, not like any other children I had met. He exuded an odd mix of sadness and menace simultaneously. I retreated slowly, trying not to make a sound, but his eyes followed me. I ran back into the house as fast as I could, pushing through the crowd of adults and children still caught up in the celebration. I clung to my mother, gripping her hand tightly, and tried to explain what I saw. "There's a boy in the garden," I said, my voice trembling. "He was watching me." My mother smiled, thinking I was playing or imagining things. "Maybe it was one of your friends hiding, darling," she said, ruffling my hair. I insisted, telling her about his ragged clothes and dark eyes, but no one took me seriously. My father even checked the garden, but returned with a report that no one was there. Since that day, I never saw the boy again, but the image of his empty eyes never left me. Every time I close my eyes, especially at night, I can feel that gaze again, as if the boy from the garden is still there, waiting behind the bushes, watching. My 6th birthday, which should have been a beautiful memory, became the beginning of a nightmare that I carried into adulthood. When I was 7, my family moved into an old house on the outskirts of town. It was a large house with 3 stories, a dark attic, and many nooks and crannies to explore. I loved my room on the 2nd floor, especially because it had a large window overlooking a small forest behind the house. My first few nights there felt exciting, full of new adventures. However, it wasn't long before I started hearing noises. At first, it was just faint whispers, as if someone was talking in the next room. I thought it was my parents, but when I asked, they always said they didn't hear anything. The noises became more frequent, especially when I was alone in my room. One night, as I was reading a book in bed, the whispers became clearer. I could hear my name being called, accompanied by a strange, low chuckle, as if the laughter was coming from inside the wall next to my bed. My heart pounded. I knew I wasn't imagining this. I pressed my ear against the wall, and the sound grew closer, sounding like a small child playing. I dared to ask, "Who's there?" The laughter stopped, and then there was a faint scratching sound from inside the wall. It sent shivers down my spine. I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room, telling them what had happened. My father dismissed it as my overactive imagination, and even knocked on my bedroom wall, demonstrating its solidity. But he was wrong. The whispers didn't stop. Instead, the sounds began to form conversations, as if there was a friend living inside the wall. I started talking to him, asking who he was and why he was there. My friend inside the wall never gave clear answers, just a series of laughs and mumbles that somehow felt comforting to my lonely self. His name, he said, was Leo. I spent hours talking to Leo, telling him about my day, my toys, and my fears. My parents thought I had an imaginary friend, and they let me be, happy that I was no longer complaining about being lonely in the new house. They didn't know that Leo was real, at least to me, and he was no longer just whispering. As time went on, Leo started asking for strange things. "Can you give me your teddy bear?" he whispered one night. I asked how, since he was inside the wall. He just chuckled and said, "Just throw it into the gap under your bed." I did, and the next morning my teddy bear was gone. Then he asked for candy, small toys, and even some of my drawings. Each time, the items disappeared after I slipped them into the gap between my mattress and the wall. I started to feel scared. Leo's requests became more frequent and peculiar, and sometimes I could hear rustling sounds as if something was moving between the walls. One night I heard sobbing. It was Leo. He said he was sad and alone, and he wanted me to join him. He said, "Open the door, my name. I want to play." I didn't know which door he meant, but the voice in the wall sounded urgent. The climax happened a week later. I woke up in the middle of the night to extremely loud scratching sounds from inside the wall, as if someone was trying to break through. The sounds became more intense, and I heard Leo screaming, but not his usual playful screams. It was a scream filled with rage. "You can't hide forever," he roared, his voice now sounding older, harsher, and not like a child's at all. I hid under my covers, trembling with fear. My parents woke up from the commotion and rushed into my room. My father turned on the lights and looked at the wall I pointed to, but there was nothing. "It might be mice, honey," he said, trying to reassure me. But I knew it wasn't mice. That night, I swore never to speak to Leo again. A few days later, my parents called a builder to inspect the wall. They found a large cavity behind the drywall, which looked like a hiding place. Inside, they found my toys, the candy I'd given, and an old teddy bear. But there was no sign of Leo. However, every time I pass that wall, I swear I can feel a cold draft, and sometimes I still hear my name being whispered, inviting me to play again.
Our family moved a lot when I was a kid. My dad was in the military, so every few years we'd pack up our lives and start fresh in a new town, a new house, a new school. This particular move happened when I was 8, to a quiet suburban neighborhood in a state I'd never heard of before. The house was decent, nothing special, but it had a big backyard with an old rusty swing set that I immediately claimed as my own. The first few weeks were lonely. I hadn't made any friends yet, and my only companions were the worn-out swings and the old tire hanging from a tree. I spent hours out there pushing myself higher and higher, trying to feel the wind against my face, trying to forget how much I missed my old friends. One afternoon, as I was mid-swing, I saw him. Standing by the edge of our fence, just where the overgrown bushes met the neighbor's yard, was a boy. He was about my age, maybe a little taller, with pale skin and light, almost translucent hair that fell into his eyes. He wore a faded blue shirt and dark trousers, and he just stood there, perfectly still, watching me. He didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't try to get my attention. He just watched. I was a bit shy, so I just kept swinging, glancing at him occasionally. After a while, he turned and slowly walked away, disappearing behind the bushes. The next day, he was there again, in the same spot at the same time. This continued for days, then weeks. He was always there, always watching, never moving, never speaking. I told my mom about the boy next door, hoping she'd introduce us. "What boy, dear?" she asked, looking genuinely confused. "The one with the pale hair who stands by the fence," I explained, pointing. My mom frowned. "We don't have neighbors with a boy that age, honey. Old Mrs. Henderson lives there alone." I insisted, but she just shook her head, suggesting I was seeing things. This made me feel uneasy. If he wasn't real, then who was he? I tried to approach him once, walking slowly towards the fence, but the closer I got, the more he seemed to fade, becoming transparent, like a ripple in water. When I reached the spot, there was nothing but the rustling leaves. The strangest thing was not just his silent presence, but his eyes. They were wide and unblinking, a dull gray color that seemed devoid of any emotion. They didn't follow me. They just stared straight ahead, as if seeing something beyond me, something only he could perceive. One evening, as dusk was falling, I was still on the swings, and he appeared again. But this time, he wasn't by the fence. He was standing directly under the old tire swing, closer to me than ever before. His head was tilted slightly, and for the first time I felt like his gaze was directly on me. A cold dread seeped into my bones. He still wasn't moving, but I could feel his presence, heavy and suffocating. A whisper, faint but distinct, floated on the evening air. "You'll be like me soon." I screamed, falling off the swing and scrambling back to the house. My parents rushed out, but by then he was gone. They checked the yard, the bushes, but found nothing. They tried to reassure me, but the fear had lodged itself deep inside. From that day on, I never went to the backyard alone after sunset. I knew he was still out there, that boy who never played, just waiting. Even now, years later, whenever I see an empty swing set or a lone child standing silently watching, a cold shiver runs down my spine. The memory of his empty gaze and that chilling whisper stays with me, a constant reminder of the boy who wanted to join me in his eternal, silent game.
My childhood home had a peculiar layout. My bedroom was on the second floor, directly above the living room, and its window faced the street. What made it peculiar was the large oak tree, ancient and gnarled, whose branches brushed against my window pane. I loved that tree during the day. It provided shade and a sense of a secret hideout. But at night, especially when the wind howled, its shadows danced like grotesque figures on my walls, and the rustling leaves sounded like whispers right outside my ear. I was a child of 9, easily spooked, and often found myself pulling the curtains tightly shut, trying to block out the darkness beyond. One night, I couldn't sleep. A particularly violent thunderstorm had raged outside, leaving the air heavy and still. I remember lying in bed, staring at the dimly lit ceiling when I noticed something. A flicker of movement in the reflection of my closed window. I sat up, my heart beginning to pound. The curtains were drawn, but the street lights outside were bright enough to cast a faint glow. In that faint glow, a shadow appeared. It was the outline of a man, standing perfectly still, looking into my room. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and wore a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. I froze. My entire body turned to ice. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. He just stood there, motionless, like a statue carved from the night itself. The way he was positioned, it looked as if he was floating just outside my window, suspended in the air. I kept telling myself it was just a trick of the light, a shadow from the tree, or my imagination running wild after the storm. But the longer I stared, the more real he became. There was an eerie stillness about him that contradicted the idea of a natural shadow. Shadows move with the light. They sway with the wind. This figure was perfectly, unnervingly still. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My eyes burned, but I couldn't look away. I was trapped in his silent gaze, even though I couldn't see his eyes. I wanted to cry for my parents, but my throat was constricted by terror. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, his arm began to lift. His hand, long and skeletal in the dim light, reached out towards the window pane. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like a predator reaching for its prey. My mind screamed to me to close my eyes, to hide under the covers, but a morbid fascination held me captive. His fingers touched the glass, and I swear I heard a faint, almost inaudible scrape. It was then that I saw it, a small, dark red stain on the window where his fingertip had been. That was enough. The spell was broken. I finally found my voice, a strangled yelp that quickly escalated into a full-blown scream. My parents burst into my room, flicking on the lights. "What's wrong, honey?" my mom cried, rushing to my side. I pointed a trembling finger at the window. The man in the window!" My dad looked out, then opened the curtains, revealing nothing but the dark branches of the oak tree. They tried to calm me, assuring me it was just a bad dream, but they couldn't explain the small dark smudge on the glass. It wasn't there before. My dad wiped it away, dismissing it as dirt. But I knew what I saw. For years after that night, I slept with a nightlight on, the curtains taped shut, and my bed pushed as far away from that window as possible. Even now, decades later, I still can't shake the feeling that sometimes, late at night, if I were to look out my window, I might just see him again. The silent man in the wide-brimmed hat, watching from the darkness.
When I was around 10 years old, my favorite pastime was to stay up late, huddled under my blankets with my trusty little walkie-talkie. It was a cheap toy, one of a pair, but my brother had long since abandoned his, leaving me with a single device that mostly just picked up static. Still, there was a certain thrill in fiddling with the dial, hoping to catch a stray signal, a distant conversation, anything that would break the monotony of my quiet suburban nights. My bedroom was small, and the only light came from a crack under my door and the faint glow of the walkie-talkie's small LED. One particularly lonely night, the static was louder than usual, a constant hiss that filled the small space around me. I was about to give up and just go to sleep when, through the sea of white noise, I heard something. A faint sound, like a whisper trying to push through a thick wall. I froze, my hand hovering over the dial. It wasn't a radio station. It was too garbled, too personal. It sounded like a child's voice, barely audible, hidden beneath layers of fuzz. My heart began to race. I had never picked up anything like this before. With trembling fingers, I slowly adjusted the frequency, inch by agonizing inch, trying to clear the signal. The whispers grew a little stronger, and I could almost make out words. It was a girl, I thought, and she sounded scared. She was speaking in short, broken sentences, interspersed with heavy breathing and what sounded like muffled sobs. "Hello? Can anyone hear me? I'm lost, so cold." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a game. This wasn't some late-night prank. Her voice was too genuine, too filled with raw fear. I tried to talk back, pressing the transmit button. "Hello? Who is this? Where are you?" But all that came out was static. My walkie-talkie was only a receiver without the other pair. I could hear her, but she couldn't hear me.
The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was listening to a cry for help, utterly powerless to respond. The girl continued to speak, her words becoming more desperate. She described being in a dark, cold place, unable to find her way out. She mentioned a man who had taken her, though she never elaborated. Each new detail sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I imagined her, alone and terrified, somewhere out there in the vast darkness, her voice reaching me through some inexplicable glitch in the airwaves. I stayed up for hours, clutching the walkie-talkie, listening to her dwindling hope. Her voice grew weaker, her sentences more fragmented, until finally there was only the static. Just the static, as if she had never been there at all. The next morning, I told my parents everything, the fears still fresh in my mind. They dismissed it as a dream, a vivid nightmare brought on by too much imagination. But I knew what I heard. I kept the walkie-talkie, trying for weeks, then months, to find that frequency again. I never did. The static remained silent or offered only meaningless chatter. But the girl's voice, her terrified pleas, remained etched in my memory. Years later, an unsolved missing persons case from a neighboring town flashed on the news. A young girl, about my age at the time, abducted from her home during a power outage. The details were eerily similar to what I had heard. To this day, I can't shake the chilling thought that I was a silent witness to her final moments, connected only by a toy walkie-talkie and the desperate whisper in the static.